Good afternoon, Mr. President of Farmaindustria, Mr. Secretary of State of Economy and Support to the Enterprises, President of the Social and Economic Council, speakers and participants, Professor Lichtenberg and other participants, dear friends. As host of this meeting that I received advice from my good friend Juan Guillermo, whom I knew when he was in the OECD, and on behalf of the trustees and the direction of the Ramón Areces Foundation, I would like to thank you for having chosen us as a venue for this meeting. And I would like to welcome you here, all of you. I also would like to excuse if there are some problems that are still here because that are due to the process of the different reforms that we are doing in our venue, in our headquarters. Ramón Areces Foundation is, as you know, a scientific DNA foundation that dedicates its energy to promoting scientific research projects, for training of human assets through a system of grants and diffusion of scientific thought, and the main variables of contemporary culture. We do that in the setting of sciences of life and matter, social sciences, and humanities as well. But it's the sciences of life that are branding the scientific personality of the foundation. As an anecdote, I can tell you that the vice chairman of our scientific council, Professor José María Medina, is professor and academician in pharmacy. For all of that, you understand that we feel very comfortable hosting a meeting a day on this issue on drugs and the social value of investing in healthcare. We started to deal about this issue years ago when I had the honor of being the ambassador of Spain before the WHO, and we could anticipate the relevance that this issue was going to have. The Ramón Areces Foundation, where we treat all these topics with a mainstream conception and interdisciplinary manner, we have been able to appreciate the growing incidence in the general economic framework and in the economy of specific sectors as energy, education, and health. Those disciplines are being integrated already in the general macroeconomic approach, of course. We have also been able to appreciate in the Ramón Areces Foundation the growing social awareness of the Spanish society concerning the importance and the potential of the economy of education and health. It's quite obvious that the recent pandemic has made aware and has sensitized the whole Spanish society that is already perceiving this situation and also the health policy that is affecting directly their daily lives. It's also very important, the importance of the research in the pharmaceutical sector, not only for progress concerning health, but also in the economy that is surrounding us. To go into depth in economic, legal, and social aspects derived from this situation is an obvious challenge. I don't have to say, given his technical opinions, that I hope that you will discuss today successfully. We will follow your results with all the interest and love. We're congratulating you for this initiative. I wish you all the best in this debate. Thank you very much.
Now I give the floor in the second place to Jesús Ponce, chairman of Farmaindustria, the Spanish Pharmaceutical Industry Association. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Secretary of State Gonzalo, the Director of the Ramón Areces Foundation, Raimundo, friends, attendants, associates, good afternoon. Welcome to this exceptional, outstanding quality forum. I reiterate the gratitude for Ramón Areces Foundation to making available the venue and the facilities. Thank you very much, Raimundo. It's a pleasure to be here with you. The terrible pandemic that we have lived has shown us brutally how healthcare, medication, and investigations that make it possible are relevant for our lives. We have witnessed witness the value of science and innovation, and not only from a perspective of healthcare, but also from economic and social point of view, and not only from an individual point of view, but also from a collective point of view as society. We've all been involved by the pandemic to a greater or lesser extent. Many human lives have been lost, regrettably, and we've all been influenced personally and professionally in the dynamics in our companies and families, how we've been involved by meetings when we try to relate to other colleagues, and also how we related to our friends, our family, our loved ones. And in short, we have experienced the fear and uncertainty on facing the unknown. And how do we measure all this from an economic impact point of view? There are some references quantifiable. The GDP in Spain dropped in 11% by 2020 with a loss of 150 million euros. But there are so many other things that we are unable to quantify or inappropriately. What about the cost of lives lost, the weeks and months of waiting lists at hospitals, the long recovery period of many patients? What is the cost of the psychological disorders and the emotional scars that has left in all our society, in all of us? And this tough experience, because it's been really tough, has made evident for the whole of society what scientific evidence had demonstrated before. Investing in healthcare, medication, and biomedical investigation is not really an expenditure, it's an investment with a return from the social, economic, and healthcare point of view. If I could define the success of an event of these features mentioned, one of the main take-home messages as ambassadors of this event would be this reflection: devoting investment to biomedical research is not an expenditure, it's an investment. Last year, the economist Antón Costas, that we are welcoming here today, it's a great pleasure, and as the president of the Council of Economic and Social Affairs, that we will listen later on, has said the following when we met a year ago, and I quote, "The pandemic has made us see that our priorities were wrong. Investing in public health and healthcare innovation improves the equity and justice in our country and increases the economic efficiency of the country. €1 invested in healthcare has a multiplier effect in economic and employment terms much greater than any other euro in any other economic activity. It is worthwhile to invest in healthcare." And if we review the economic evidence we have, Professor Frank Lichtenberg, who is honoring us, and also tomorrow, thank you very much for his presence, from the Columbia University, is an international authority in the matter, and he has published a lot of studies and evidence associated to medication and life expectancy, and how the increase in life expectancy bears benefits in economic and productivity and growth of our country. And all of it, of course, mainly due to the new medications and drugs that have been available in the last decades. And in that sense, I would like to mention as the first food for thought this afternoon an already existing study that we have shared sometimes before that shows that during 1999 to 2009, the first decade of the 21st century, this main study undertaken in the OECD countries showed that the life expectancy increase of almost 2 years experienced in those countries was to a great extent due to the availability of the innovating drugs in almost 73% of the cases. So Professor Lichtenberg's study shows these results and how investing in innovating medication increases globally the value for society as a whole, just as the Spanish legislation mandates. In this intervention, I mentioned two main blocks. The first one is relative to the very dramatic experience during the pandemic and how it's helped us to reflect, and secondly, the empirical evidence that we are capable of generating that support all this. And with these two elements, I think we can help ourselves to review our own approach, methodologies, and to assess best what is priceless, our health and our welfare, which is the main objective of this meeting today and tomorrow morning. We'll try to analyze this reality and propose ideas for debate to advance in our knowledge with the adequate economic regulation. We have the participation of distinguished members of the panel that will talk about the social value of medication and the design of the regulatory economic principles, which is the main reason that we're meeting here today. From Farmaindustria, we believe that dialogue and interaction with all the state parties will find the way to approach the reform of our system with the common goal of improving people's lives. At Farmaindustria, we are aware that society needs us, and we are committed because we are here to go on innovating for people. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good meeting.
Thank you very much, Jesus. And I give the floor to Gonzalo García Andrés, Secretary of State of Economy and Support to Companies in Spain. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be able to be here with you in the opening of this meeting, that only with its approach is already telling us how much we have advanced and how much we've learned. During the last 15 years, we've had to face economic and social situations that have had a great cost, that have meant a great trial for all our capacity of adaptation and response. And one of the greatest assets we've got is learning. And no doubt that the terrible experience of the pandemic has forged some things in the relationship of health with economy. The idea that there could be some transaction, some exchange between health and economy has finally been destroyed. And during that time, I think that some ideas that were already very rooted in the Spanish society, as, for instance, the value of health as an essential pillar of welfare, this idea that to dedicate resources to health is to invest and not to spend. Another important element that we can see in health, but that goes beyond it as well, is that efficiency and equity, that means the growth and justice, are not in dispute, and in the realm of health, they do complement each other. We can reach both things. Another big lesson of the pandemic regarding health is, on the one side, the importance of the public system, national health system. In the countries that had public health systems that were powerful have been able to face that situation under better conditions. But at the same time, the importance of the tight collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. The pharmaceutical industry, in the production and manufacturing, but in all the other set of sectors, in basic research, innovation. And these are the the assets that we have to take into account to face the future. These phase that comes after the pandemic. The strategy of economic politics in the social and political vision of the government, the vision of health as a fundamental pillar of sustainable development has been from the very beginning there. But with the experience of the pandemic, we realized, we were able to verify the value that the national health system has, and all the whole set, not only the public health system, but also the private health systems and all of you who work in order to improve the care of health of all citizens. It was quite clear, stated quite clearly, how important it is to work all together. Unfortunately, from the great economic convulsion meant by the pandemic, as Jesús has alluded to its cost for him, we have come out from it with a very strong recovery of the economy, employment, and what is even more important, we've done so in a different manner than what the Spanish economy had to go out from such situations, with qualitative and structural improvements that are every time more and more obvious in different settings and under different indicators. And now we are in a phase, not a defensive phase as the one we had during the pandemic. We had to try to protect the economy from the great impact of the health crisis and prevent it leaving durable wounds or injuries in the life of the workers, in the capacity of production of the companies, in the productive fabric. And now we are in an offensive phase. We are in a phase of transformation, economic transformation, strengthening the basis of the sustainable growth, a phase that is very much linked to the recovery plan, to that big and important European answer, that response that came after an initial response that was as efficient as were the joint purchase and the joint development of vaccines. And now when I read, when I listen, hear about the black prophecies, and after the summer the world will come to an end, and if it is not ended, then don't worry, because it's going to end at some point in time in the coming 6 months. Well, if I look back and I remember where we were 2 years ago, where we were told we don't know how much the vaccine will take. Historically, never has a vaccine developed in such a short time. And I think that the development of the vaccine for COVID is a fantastic example of how to respond to such a situation in a collaborative and operational manner between the public and private sectors, with a focus that goes beyond the national action in order to do it at a European scale. And it's an example that has to make us be trustful and inspired. What I wanted to share with you today is what is the role of health within this new economic strategy that is focused on the recovery plan and resilience plan, and that is a great program of investments and structural reforms in which health is playing a very important role. You know that this plan is equipped with up to 160,000 million euros. It's a fundamental resource. It's a plan in which we do combine investments, public investments, but also support from private investment, both with the direct tools that the general administration of the state has, as with the investment of resources from the autonomous communities in our country, and also with a new instrument as well of industrial policy, that is the project of reconstruction and the economic transformation. One of the most well-known ones is the PERTE of the Vanguard Health. It tries to help the economy of the Spanish society to make that leap, taking advantage of all the capabilities that the system system of health in Spain has, in order to strengthen the industrial technological capabilities based on precision medicine, on advanced therapies, and on artificial intelligence. This strategic project is encompassing coordinating two agendas of specific actions, one that has to do with the scientific network and also another one with the entrepreneurial network, and tries to encourage and foster the stimulus of the collaboration, the deepest collaboration between the scientific area and the entrepreneurial sector. When the PERTE of health was approved, the endowment of public resources was 1.5 billion for 2021-2023, and now we are around the full process of elaboration, the addenda to the recovery plan that tries to complement the initial plan with the resources that we still have to require from these. There are 7,500 million of additional resources that will be aimed to reinforce these PERTEs in Spain, strategic projects. And the vanguard one was the Minister of Health and Sciences did announce that the PERTE had a public endowment of 50%, an additional one. So this extension of the resources indicates not only the importance that the government gives to health, but also how this project is going on well. 52% of the investment has been executed until now from the foreseen investment in the PERTE, and right now, among the different calls that have been solved, we have aid to research projects of personalized medicine and precision medicine, more than 81 million euros, and also the call of award of helps, aid for strategic projects for the industrial sector and the health sector. And this is not the end of the work to develop all these projects. Today, we have been debating on another project of thrust to a network for advanced therapies. And this part of investments has to be complemented with this other part of structural reforms of different regulations, so that the way in which this ambitious program has the greatest economic impact is combining the money, the investments, public and private investments, with changes in the regulations, changes that improve the institutional framework, give us more capabilities in order to make better decisions, improve our public policies. Within this recovery plan, there is a reform destined to improve the systems of evaluation of drugs and technologies and health services, with which we want to reinforce the efficacy and the effectiveness cost of the drugs as well. And we also have the ongoing reform of creating that space of health data. It's an important element to improve the decision-making. I wanted to point out the importance of this part of the program of reform and investment. And I know that in Spain, since many years, there are different institutions that are dedicated to evaluating economically these health, not only for drugs, but also technologies. And I think that we have enough room to improve, for improvement, that keep on making efforts, both from the point of view of the institutional design and how the decisions are made, cooperation, coordination among the different stakeholders in this system, that in our case is a complex one, because there are many stakeholders, and also from the point of view of the resources that are aimed for those assessment systems. We talked about the importance of investing, but of course, investment, and in this case we have the axis of energy transition, we have the axis of digital transition, we also have this fundamental axis that is the social axis, and we also have to invest in the best possible manner. To do that, it's very important to assess the health technologies. It's very important for us to be able to assess, evaluate every possible new drug, bearing in mind which is its cost with respect to what is the improvement that this drug is going to produce in the life of the patients. because we are also in another process, structural process, of the aging of the population that will make that the resources aimed to health, destined to health, have to progressively be growing. If we are able to invest properly and that the economy follows a stability pathway of reform and greater potential growth, this shouldn't be a problem. But it is very important that we will be able to improve the way in which we make our decisions so that we can introduce that element, the cost element, and sustainability, financial sustainability that is absolutely essential in the policy of approval of new drugs. Jesús has already referred to the other fundamental reform that is ongoing, the modification of the law of guarantees and rational use of drugs. And I believe that this reform, as well as the others, and also the investments of this plan, will allow us to make that thrust that we need, because with the pandemic we realized that, yes, we have a very good healthcare system, but a system that can't be forgotten. We have to strengthen it in many of its dimensions, with investment, with regulation, and with improvement of cooperation and coordination of all of us. It's a joint effort. There is another element as well that is important for all of you, that is the strategic plan of pharmaceutical industry that will be articulated with respect to the pharmaceutical European strategy that has to contribute to the creation of qualified employment, position Spain as a pole of innovation in the European Union. In this strategy, this element of autonomy is absolutely fundamental. The addenda to the recovery plan, the guiding thread in this strategic economy that we have to strengthen in a world that from the geopolitical point of view is more and more complicated, and where we have already seen that Europe has to try to be not only to be self-sufficient but autonomous, but also not be isolated, far from that, but also depending having more capability in strategic sectors in order not to depend too much on the decisions or the things that may happen outside Europe. In order to finish, I wanted to point out once again, if there is something that a great majority of people in Spain we do agree, and even more so after the pandemic, but this is something that even before the pandemic was already rare setting for agreement among the Spaniards, the importance and the value of health and the health system. This is a pillar of sustainable growth. It's an essential pillar of the strategy of economic and social policy of the government. And we have to strengthen it. We are doing that with these investments and with the reforms and with those improvements in the regulation. The title is Refocusing the Economic Regulation. I don't know if it requires a new approach, but it does require continuous ongoing improvement, adaptation, and once again, learning. And to do that, it's important not to lose sight of the things that are caused by the aging of the population and the investment. We have to invest and dedicate resources, but we have to do it well because there is a lot at stake. And I end with an element that I believe is important. In order to do this properly and well, it's fundamental to go into depth in the cooperation, the dialogue, the exchange between all the agents of the private sector and all the institutions that do deal with health in the social sector and also the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary of Economy and Entrepreneurial Support. We have seen two facets, the facet of investing in healthcare and then the facet of investing in medication, in drugs. These are more or less, if I could say so, the introduction. So in order to plunge into this idea of investing in healthcare. We are lucky enough to have Professor Antón Costas, President of the Economic and Social Council of Spain, analyzing this particular issue because during the pandemic it changed and evolved, and what this experience has meant for all of us. And it's a great pleasure to have Antón with us. You have the floor.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon,
Apreciado secretario de Estado,
my dear Secretary of State,
de Farmaindustria,
Chairman of Farmaindustria,
Farmaindustria,
Managing Director of Farmaindustria. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. To me, it is an honor, indeed, and also a pleasure to be able to share this forum with you. And I'm back again at another event of Farmaindustria. And I also have to add to this gratitude a certain feeling of being overwhelmed. I mean, I read the program and I see these brilliant careers of all the other speakers and members of the panel. I have this feeling of being overwhelmed because academically nor professionally I am not an expert on a par with them in healthcare economics nor in the pharmaceutical industry, although it is true that I have belonged to the board of directors of a pharmaceutical company for many years. And as you would say, talking about healthcare, they almost defined as kind of professional sick patient. After all these years, we've been walking down the corridors of a big hospital in Spain. I've been in the operator in the ORs, and I was seen all the time going down the hospitals, and the director said, "Why now don't you join the board and the management of the hospital?" And that's why I have certain familiarity, not real knowledge, but a familiarity with the pharmaceutical industry and, on the other hand, the provision of healthcare. So I was given half an hour, and I would like to reflect out loud. And they don't come exclusively of direct and in-depth knowledge of the healthcare economics or the pharmaceutical industry, but come mainly from my academic experience, many years analyzing and reforming public policies. And so it will be that perspective that I will use with the contributions of books and recent publications, and also with the proximity factor that is given to me by presiding the Council of Economic and Social Affairs in Spain. This institution has devoted many of its reports and yearly institutional papers to healthcare reform. And in the next few months, we have drafted a new report on this current situation of the healthcare system and pharmaceutical innovation in Spain. And with the perspective of this study, I would like to talk about this matter for the next 25 minutes. What is it that I want to convey? What is it that I want to do? This was seen many years ago in an event similar to this at Santiago in Spain. The organizer, the chancellor of the Santiago University, as I was going down the corridor, the director said to me, not saying hello, he says, Antón,
¿También traes un PowerPoint o tienes algo
do
que
you
decir?
have a PowerPoint or do you have something to say?
Aquella expresión, la verdad es que me
As if
quedó
it
mucho.
was
Algunos
incompatible,
lo
you know.
habrán escuchado en otra ocasión.
It stuck with me, you know. Do you have a PowerPoint or something to say for real? When you're invited, you should have something to say, right? Well, that's it. What I really wanted to say is the following, and I'll try to explain why later on, that health is, in my opinion, the best recipe to achieve prosperity of a country. And I'm fully convinced, as I will explain, there are other elements concerning prosperity, but without any doubt, I firmly believe right now that health is the best recipe to attain prosperity in any given country. So maybe the title of my intervention could be modified. It would be better expressed saying that I advocate the need to have a social contractual agreement for health in our country, and we need it. This is essential. A covenant that we need to agree upon. And I will argue that health is an essential factor of our prosperity. And the lack of health of part of our population subtracts from the whole country an extraordinary amount of possibilities for prosperity. I hope you accept this and share my opinion. And from my perspective from public policies, I think we must believe a body of ideas, a wealth of ideas to determine not the expenditure in pharmacy and healthcare, not an expenditure, but an investment with extraordinary returns in social point of view as well as in economic figures. And we really have to build a school of thought around it. It's not enough to have an empirical evidence of the impacts of an improvement in healthcare technology or the system or the impacts of pharmaceutical innovation. It's necessary, but it's not enough. John Maynard, as you know, who is a great economist from early last century, he used to say, his general theory book, it's known as that, and now published in 1936 in a kind of economic pandemic, right, with authoritarian and populist regimes growing in the 30s, he finished this book renewing economic thought and economic policies, and we finished saying that what they usually believe that are the prevailing interests guiding the governmental policies are not so. It's the ideas. The ideas are essential to create this kind of narrative to allow all countries to construct a new social covenant, a new set of policies. And I believe this is one of the challenges. The saying is the German word, the local circumstances. We have to profit from this climate during this decade to begin to construct this body of ideas. And I insist again that health is the best recipe for prosperity of any country. And I will try to document this with 2, 3, 4 contributions. The school of thought, or this body of ideas that we have to draft amongst ourselves. First of all, the idea that health is truly a recipe for prosperity. Very quickly, there's an anecdote I will explain, but off the top of my head, I was reminded of an anecdote. As I was the president, the chairman of the Circle of Economy from Catalonia in Spain, this has a prize which is called the Teaching Award, given to schools, primary and secondary schools that have programs on education innovation, not a reform, but education innovative initiatives that will, when deployed, evidence that can turn into indicators of the improvement of people. So many years ago, I was the president of that institution. I awarded that prize, the 3 prizes of different levels, to a school with a low-income area of Barcelona. And after bestowing the prize of the school, I was invited to visit it, right? To see what they were going to use the money for, 30,000 euros back then. And I was told that it was going to be in the kitchens. And then they said something that really stuck to me in my neurons and in my heart. One of the teachers said, you see, most of the girls and boys that you see here in the school didn't have dinner or breakfast at home. The only food they will eat is the meal at school. It is a very, very important healthcare problem. It is very serious. The pandemic came and we shut down the schools, and my question was, where will these children be able to eat? Because the only place they ate properly was in school. It does have an impact, of course, and you will tell me why. Are you thinking about it? We have very, very clear research, neurologists, physicians, psychologists, pedagogists. They say that everything in life, how well would you do in life, has a lot to do with what happens from birth to 3 years. And if you had poor health and poor feeding during this essential early stage of life until you're 3 years old, your results and outcome in life will always be suffering the detrimental effect of the lack of health and nutrition in the first years. Health is determinant. Those people, those children, those people in childhood that were affected, even those older, have lost so much prosperity for them and the country. Evidently, they lose prosperity on an individual basis. They have more difficulties in school, learning abilities, getting to secondary education, more difficulties to find a job. It is more difficult to generate income and purchasing power throughout their lives, and they have much more probabilities of developing deleterious healthcare problems. So health is determinant, and this is my creed that has prevailed in the past few years. But from the point of view of economy also, I think that there are some evidence that should be made manifest just to underscore how healthcare and innovation, pharmaceutical information has. First, on growth and productivity. There is a certain skeptical attitude in economy as a discipline on what is the impact of healthcare in growth and productivity, because in macroeconomic terms we can't mobilize this. Well, individually at microeconomic level we are able to do it, but macro variables are more difficult to identify. But there is an indirect way to measure its importance. The majority of you, of course, work with them or are very familiar with the healthcare sector, right? And it is the following. You know, in the other case where Farmaindustria invited me, I read the evolution of healthcare in the past century. Now, and you identify Frank Lichtenberg, how in the first third of the last century was terrible. Mark Twain was correcting Charles Marx. History doesn't repeat itself. but it does rhyme. And I'm afraid how history is rhyming with what it was 100 years ago. Okay. The parenthesis is finished, but when we consider investment, not expenditure, investment in healthcare throughout the last century, there are two well-differentiated stages. The first stage is of enthusiasm, an enthusiastic investment in healthcare, which is extraordinary. In the 40s, after the Second World War, until the 70s, the great hospitals were built, the great healthcare systems were created. There is a promotion in pharmaceutical sector, so it is an enthusiastic stage of about 30 years in healthcare. But if we consider the economic data, all in economy, growth, productivity, economic dynamism, creativity of the population is developing at an extraordinary rate. Is it a coincidence? The coincidence in time must be taken into account. There's been a huge investment in healthcare, and the productivity, the dynamism, the creativity of the citizenship improved extraordinarily. So we haven't seen such a renaissance again. And after the 80s until very recently, there's a second stage. There was an enthusiastic investment in healthcare, and now there was a frustration stage, a very important degree of frustration. And quite curiously, if I read the data for the last 30 years, what do we see about growth, productivity, economic dynamism, and what we call esoterically FTSP? Total factor productivity, everything went to worse. So there is a coincidence. The productivity, the dynamism, it has all gone down. And I have to be briefed. I'm looking at my clock, but there's another thing I'd like to mention today. I was very interested. It's an idea that investing in healthcare will have a very strong impact on the creativity of the majority of people. In the human dynamism, productivity, the majority of the people, majority of our citizens will be more dynamic and creative. I think that the economists are awaiting the next revolution. Where does economic dynamism come at each country? What does it rise from? For the moment being, the theory is elitist and restricted. What will you use in economy? You and I. That comes from a huge Austro-North American economist, Joseph Alonso Peter. I'm sure you're familiar with the name. Schumpeter introduced an idea that was very successful, but in some cases deleterious. The economic dynamism, according to him, comes from a set of specific people. Schumpeter thought that the majority of the population was devoid of creativity, hadn't any innovation or inventive ability. He was very elitist. And he talks about the creating destruction, the disruptive innovation idea. Things move forward and advance, and a country will progress if it is able to introduce disruptive innovations. RD from a disruptive point of view, but he demeaned and neglected that the whole of the population of any given country may have any creative or innovative ability. He was despective of them as an elitist, and it is an extraordinary limitation. If you review history in the stages of strong economic dynamism in a country, you don't really see all the time disruptive innovations, but incremental innovations. And in Spain in the 60s, you're very young, you can't identify yourselves with the 60s in Spain, but in the 60s in Spain, we said we were the China of the 20th century because Spain for a decade was growing 7-8% a year, extraordinary, outstanding. And you can understand what happened in Spain in the 60s. The economic dynamism burst. And there's just an anecdote to show. My mentors used to tell me, in 1960, the main problem for the Spanish middle class was being able to purchase a very small car, 600. 10 years later, the main problem for the middle class was where to park it. So in just 10 years, it undergoes such a huge material and spiritual transformation, means that something happened. So if you look for innovations, disruptive innovations in the Spain of the 60s, you will find a few. But what really happened was an explosion, a boom of dynamism in the economic area that was directly related with healthcare investment. So putting money, injecting money into healthcare is the main factor for economic prosperity. And investing has been shown to be fruitful during the pandemic. I'm from the south of Spain, and the sea tides are very high. When the tide pulls low, you can see who was swimming naked, meaning it makes evident your weaknesses. And the pandemic has been like a riptide that has exposed all our weaknesses and vulnerabilities in the pharmaceutical sector, in the healthcare sector, and it has made evidence this dearth, well, not dearth, but, or lack, but very weak strategic economic policies that we have in certain areas. And this kind of discovery is, in my understanding, essential and fundamental, which supports this idea that we need to invest in healthcare in the next years, in the next decades, because it will be the best way, the best recipe to promote prosperity. Because by fostering prosperity, we will improve our creativity capacity as belonging to the whole of the population when it enjoys a general health. A general good health, of course. The second idea is that this new social covenant, this investment that is needed in healthcare has probably found it's almost provoking or offensive, but it has found a most favorable circumstance being the pandemic. Without the COVID pandemic, you wouldn't be able to understand what is happening as of today. Remember, my dear Secretary of State, in the June 26, where the Next Generation funds were approved by the European Union, who would have dared that the day before that the Commission was going to approve a plan of this kind? No, of course not. If I came here in the 26th of June stating the need to set up plans, as the Secretary of State has mentioned, you would only consider that I was an old-school economy defending and advocating for old, outdated plans. But PERTES, Next Generation, all these are a new concept for strategic, technological, industrial, and developmental policies. And this would have been impossible without the pandemic. What I'm conveying now, I understand it may be received as a challenge or a provocation. The Spanish saying says there's always a silver lining in any cloud. Well, the economy is relevant as to training in policies and reformers that has been the academic conversation. What we talk about as economists is optimal crisis. This is a concept introduced from Princeton of the Advanced Institute at Princeton, Albert Hirschman, this is the kind of crisis, an optimal crisis is the crisis that because of its intensity and depth pressure greatly as a call for action, but it doesn't destroy the factors that constitute the basis for prosperity. That's an optimal crisis. It's very dangerous. It's like the Faust temptation. But in the literature, poets, and the Christian theology, there is a great long-standing tradition that speaks about this. Wherever there is an evil, there are also the seeds for good. I'm not going to take you out into a theological discourse, but it's a very important theory. Even despite the crisis environment, deep crisis, there are social and political pressures created, which are very important call for action. So it's a time of opportunity. The dreams of next generation, I've defined them as the Hamiltonian moment in Europe, reminding you of Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury of the government of George Washington in the United States. Hamilton's policies created the modern United States. And Europe is facing now a Hamiltonian momentum, and the creation and the construction of a social covenant for health is also a Hamiltonian revolution of this kind, because it generates the necessary pressures to change and create something new. As I told you in the beginning, this body of ideas, these seedlets, or this school of thought that will allow you to progress and leap forward in healthcare and health for the country. And some of these pressures, which we need to advance, are at the same time pressures and lobby mechanisms that, how could I put it, make me uneasy. There's a certain restlessness and uneasiness in me because in Spain and in other countries before the pandemic and its consequences, but even more so after the pandemic, there's, I believe, a certain escape and avoidance of the healthcare public services from the middle class. They're avoiding the public healthcare system. The middle class flees away from the public healthcare system. Don't think that this is just an opportunity for the private sector, because it has to exist, of course, and it has a long career in front of it. But if the people are avoiding or fleeing as middle class from the public healthcare system, this is not an opportunity. You'd be blind to consider it. It is a negative effect, because the middle classes are indispensable for the improvement and maintenance of good public services. Not only because they have a greater number of clients or customers, but because they can make their voice heard. Middle classes are the social group that has the greater ability to claim, protest, to be heard. This is our voice. We improve this. This should not be done, and so on and so forth. So the pressures for change contain this element, which worries me. These pressures will no longer be applied because the middle classes are going away and avoiding the public healthcare system, in particular for healthcare, of course, but for other public matters as well. And having said this, and after finishing these 2 or 3 ideas I was trying to convey, I think that COVID and the Ukrainian crisis create, both in Europe and in Spain, a time of opportunity in order to build this body of ideas that I was mentioning in the beginning, this body of ideas that will make healthcare the main recipe for prosperity of our country in the next few decades. I've got 5 minutes left, so lastly, this new social covenant that has a social and economic value for him, that will best showcase what it means to invest in healthcare, has, however, to be approached differently, with a different governance as applied to us, governance of the healthcare system and governance of the pharmaceutical regulation. We come from a long stage in Spain where a very powerful idea took root. Experts, policymakers responsible for economic policies or regulators would have an expertise that was more than enough to publish in the official paper a good regulatory framework. And then afterwards, social actors of any kind, including pharmaceutical industry, then they would deal with the regulatory fine details. It is a model of governance, of regulation, and of the healthcare that is a top-down governance model. On the top, presumably, we have people who know what they are doing, experts that put it in writing, and all the rest of us, top to bottom, fulfill it and abide with it. And we may query the regulators to clarify things, but not to change anything. And yet, the circumstances nowadays are not the same. The new governance for the healthcare system and pharmaceutical innovation must be different. The governance must to be bottom-up for the following reasons. I'll only quote one because I only have time for one. A word that we use as economists all the time that is never considered in terms of consequences, in terms of public policy and entrepreneurial policies. That word is uncertainty. Uncertainty. What does it mean? We never go beyond that. But uncertainty in economy and in entrepreneurial strategies is a very different word to risk. It actually has nothing to do with it. You have likely probable events that we know about that may take place. And for that, we have experts in the insurance companies. They have databases and statistics to calculate the likelihood of occurrence of the event, and they tell you, if you don't want to be hindered by this risk, purchase the policy with risk, and you can continue your life forgetting about risk. Risk is part of daily life in all areas in which we move. Risk is pervasive in life. I do business with a laboratory in the United Kingdom, and my ship may sink. Well, subscribe an insurance policy against currency changes and survive. And it's not a life insurance policy, but uncertainty. Uncertainty is not equal to risk at all. Uncertainty is the total inability at certain given times to determine the risks that we are facing. Uncertainty is the inability to identify risks. It's like a very thick fog when driving without any risk, without any problems, but with risk. Finally, you are stuck in smoke or in haze, and you can't see. What do? You stop driving or slow down, and you wait for the fog to clear away. Uncertainty hinders you, and the response to uncertainty cannot be the same as the response to risk. And that's what I said this morning, because the implication is very obvious. If nobody knows really the risks we are facing ahead of us, if nobody knows which will be the successful technology to choose, nobody knew which medication will be most efficacious for this type of condition. If we don't know virtually anybody knows how shall we draft regulatory governance? How shall we design the governance of healthcare? It has to be necessarily bottom-up and collaborative governance and iterative governance. Not just that we meet once and then 5 years later we'll see if we ever meet again. No, not at all. The uncertainty is so huge, so widespread, that you need many more meetings. The PERTES, the Spanish plans for strategic projects, are summoning and gathering different stake parties to face the problems of coordination and the questions of uncertainty in front of them. And this was my third idea. As I have seen in the program, you will talk about governance, regulatory governance, and I've devoted myself for many years to this issue, okay? I haven't always been successful because I was fixing the electrical power prices and look at the situation nowadays. But still, I think that the governance we need for pharmaceutical innovation, reimbursement and price policies, and the governance of a healthcare system has to be renewed in order to cope with all these questions that we are facing nowadays. And this governance must change. It has to be sustaining time, participative, and democratic. These are the three things I wanted to talk about. Health is the main recipe for prosperity, and there is basis for it. And the second one is that crisis, when leveraged upon, could be optimal crisis. A great German poet who passed away said, "There where is danger, the boldness and courage grows as well." Well, these pressures move us to act because of the uncertainty and the crisis. I want to finish, but I don't seem to get around to it. I never finish. A great philosopher, the great philosophy of justice, John Rawls, he's already passed away. A great advocate from political philosophy of the social covenant during the post-war period said that the crisis situations such as the Second World War create in the population, in all of us, a veil of ignorance towards the future. And so we are more prompted to share the solutions, pursuing a common goal, because you don't know whether you and your family will have an employment, a job, good health or not. Will you be able to pay for your healthcare costs? It's a veil of ignorance, that kind of haze that I was mentioning when explaining uncertainty. And Rawls says that the veil of ignorance makes us more likely to look for agreements for the common good, for the general interest. And this is my message, and thank you very much.